He said it right in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner. Not quietly. Not as an aside. Right in the middle of everything, with the turkey still on the table and 12 people sitting there listening. "So, Renee," he said, leaning back in his chair with that grin he gets, "when are you going to stop being so picky and just find yourself a man?" A few people laughed. That nervous kind of laugh that isn't really a laugh. More like a reflex. More like they didn't know what else to do with the silence that followed. I picked up my fork. I took a bite of my sweet potatoes. And I did not say one word. Not yet. The house was my Aunt Gloria's. Out in Decatur, Georgia. Big split level with a good furniture that never gets sat on except during holidays. She'd been cooking since the day before. You could still smell the rolls she'd made from scratch, warm and buttery, mixed in with the candles she always puts on the windowsills this time of year. There were people everywhere. Her kids. Their kids. Old family friends who'd been coming to these dinners for 30 years. Cousins I see twice a year at most. Neighbors who sort of became family the way neighbors do when you've lived next to each other long enough. I was sitting near the end of the table. My brother Gerald was sitting toward the middle, which is exactly where he likes to sit. Center of the room. Center of the conversation. That's Gerald. Has been his whole life. He's 51 years old, my brother. Married to Deb for going on 18 years. 2 kids in college. Nice house out in Alpharetta. He's done well for himself, and he wants you to know it. Not by bragging directly. Gerald's too smart for that. He does it by comparison. By pointing at other people's lives and finding the places where they don't quite measure up. And tonight, that person was me. Now, I want to be clear about something before I go further. I am 47 years old. I am single. I have been single, fully, intentionally single for the past 4 years. Before that, I was in a long relationship that ended for reasons that are mine and mine alone, that I don't owe anyone an explanation for, and that I made peace with a long time ago. I have a good life. I have my own home. I have my work, which I love. I have friendships that have lasted decades. I sleep well. I laugh a lot. I am, on most days, genuinely happy. None of that matters to Gerald. To Gerald, the fact that I'm not married is the same as the fact that I'm not finished. Like I'm a project that hasn't been completed yet. And every family gathering, without fail, he finds a way to make sure I remember that he's noticed. Usually it's subtle. A raised eyebrow when someone mentions a wedding. A comment about how some people are just too independent and that's the problem. Once, at our cousin Lisa's birthday, he told a whole table that I'd been single so long I'd probably forgotten what it felt like to have someone to come home to. That one landed. I didn't show it, but it landed. Tonight, though, he wasn't being subtle. Tonight, he was feeling himself something extra. He'd had 2 glasses of wine before we even sat down. I noticed that. Gerald gets generous with his opinions when he's had 2 glasses of wine. He'd been holding court at the table for most of the meal, talking about his golf game, some renovation they were doing on the back deck, his older boy's internship up in D.C. And people were listening the way people do when someone is confident enough to expect to be listened to. Then there was a small lull. Just a few seconds where the conversation dipped. And Gerald looked down the table at me and he smiled, and he said it. "So, Renee, when are you going to stop being so picky and just find yourself a man?" A beat. Old Mr. Henderson from next door laughed a little. My cousin Terrell looked down at his plate. Aunt Gloria kept her eyes on the gravy boat like it was the most fascinating thing she'd ever seen. Deb, Gerald's wife, reached for her water glass and took a long, slow sip. Nobody said a word. "I'm serious," Gerald said, pressing it. He was smiling, but the smile had edges. "You're not getting any younger, baby sister. I'm just saying what everybody's thinking." And there it was. The second push. That's what he does. He says something that cuts, waits to see if you'll react, and if you don't, he says it again, louder, and frames it as concern. Like he's doing you a favor. Like he's the brave one for being honest about what everyone else is too polite to mention. Except nobody in that room was thinking what Gerald said they were thinking. I know these people. They weren't thinking about my relationship status. They were thinking about their food and their families and whether the Cowboys game was going to be on later.
Gerald was thinking about it.
Gerald is always the one thinking about it. But if I say that out loud, I'm defensive. I'm sensitive. I can't take a joke.
So, I didn't say it.
I just looked at him, just for a second, and I said, "I'm fine, Gerald." And I went back to my food. He chuckled, looked around the table for backup. "I'm just saying, at some point you gotta stop waiting for perfect." My Aunt Gloria said, very quietly, "Gerald, let her eat." But Gerald is not a man who lets things go when he's got an audience. He leaned forward a little. "I just want my sister to be happy." And that right there is the most dangerous sentence in the English language when it comes out of a certain kind of person's mouth. I just want you to be happy. Because what it really means is, I don't understand your life, and instead of examining why that bothers me, I'm going to frame my discomfort as concern for you. I know my brother. I know him the way you only know someone after 47 years of watching them up close. I know his good parts, and he has them. I want to be fair about that. He can be generous. He can be funny. When our mother was sick, he showed up every single weekend. There are things about Gerald that I genuinely love. But I also know this. Gerald has not been happy inside his marriage for a long time. Not unhappy enough to do anything about it. Just unhappy enough that the happiness of other people, real, quiet, unperformed happiness, irritates him in a way he doesn't fully understand. I know about the conversation he and Deb had at Easter because Deb told my cousin Lisa and Lisa told me, not as gossip, just as worry because she didn't know what to do with what she'd heard. I know that things behind that nice house in Alpharetta are not what they look like from the outside. I hadn't said a word about it. Not to anyone. Not one word. That was still true. But Gerald had pushed 3 times now, in front of a table full of people, and I was done letting it pass. I set my fork down. Not hard.
Gently.
I put it right beside my plate, and I folded my hands in front of me, and I looked at my brother straight on. "Gerald," I said, "can I ask you something?" He spread his hands out like he was welcoming the conversation. "Go right ahead." The table was very quiet. I could hear someone's child playing down the hall. I could hear the furnace. I could hear myself breathing slow and even. "Are you happy?" I said. He blinked. "Just once." "What?" "I'm asking you directly."
"You."
"Not me." "Are you happy?" "Of course I'm." "Because you've mentioned my relationship status 3 times in the last 10 minutes, I said.
Calm.
Measured. Like I was talking about the weather. And in my experience, people who are genuinely content with their own lives don't think about other people's that much. The room went absolutely still. Gerald's mouth was open slightly. Not to speak. Just open. "I'm not upset," I said. "I'm not saying this to be mean. I'm saying it because I think you actually believe you're helping me. And I want you to know that I don't need help. I'm good, Gerald. I'm really genuinely good." I paused. The question is whether you can say the same thing. Nobody laughed this time. There was no nervous reflex. No awkward chuckle. Just silence, and the sound of someone setting a fork down very carefully at the other end of the table. Deb was looking at her water glass again, but her jaw had changed. Something around her eyes had changed. Gerald looked at me for a long moment, and for the first time in I don't know how many years, my brother didn't have anything to say. He picked up his napkin. He smoothed it across his lap. He reached for his wine glass, then seemed to think better of it, and put his hand back on the table instead. "I was just joking around," he said finally. Quieter than before. Much quieter. "I know," I said. And I meant it. Not sarcastically. I really did know. I just think sometimes the jokes we make about other people's lives say more about ours. I picked up my fork. I went back to my food. Aunt Gloria reached over and touched my hand, just briefly, and didn't say anything, which was the exactly right thing to do. Old Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and said something about the sweet potatoes being the best he'd had since last year, and my cousin Terrell picked that up and agreed, and slowly, carefully, like a fire that somebody had turned the oxygen back on in, the room filled with conversation again. Gerald was quiet for most of the rest of the meal. He talked some, but he didn't perform. The big, centered energy he'd had when we sat down was just gone. Like something had been let out of a balloon slowly, not popped, just let out. He helped clear the table after dinner. He thanked Aunt Gloria for cooking. When he and Deb were leaving, he hugged me at the door. Not a long hug, but a real one. The kind where someone's actually there. He said, "Happy Thanksgiving, Renee." I said, "Happy Thanksgiving, Gerald." That was all. I drove home that night with the windows down a little, even though it was cold, because I needed the air. I needed the quiet. I want to tell you that I felt triumphant, but that's not quite the right word. What I felt was something more like settled, more like clean, like I had finally said the thing I should have said years ago, and I had said it without cruelty, without tears, without making a scene, and now it was said, and I could put it down. I thought about Deb on the drive home. I hope she's okay. I mean that sincerely. Whatever is happening in that house in Alpharetta, I hope she's okay, and I hope they figure it out, and I hope the figuring out is kind to both of them. I thought about Gerald. I thought about how much energy it takes to spend 18 years pointing at other people's lives instead of looking at your own. That sounds like a lot of work. That sounds exhausting. And then I thought about myself, my house, my quiet Tuesday evenings. My garden that I've been building for 3 years, slow and patient. My friendships. My work. The particular freedom that comes with being the architect of your own days, with not having to negotiate for your own peace. I thought about all of it and I didn't feel lacking. I felt, if I'm being completely honest with you, like the luckiest woman at that table. Here is what I want you to take from this. There will always be someone in your life who mistakes your peace for a problem, who looks at the way you've arranged your life, quietly on your own terms, without needing applause for it, and decides that because it doesn't look like theirs, it must be wrong. It must be incomplete. It must need fixing. Those people are not bad people, most of the time. They're just people who are scared. Scared that the choices they made might not be the only right choices. Scared that someone else's contentment is somehow a comment on their own. You don't have to explain yourself to them, but you also don't have to stay quiet forever. There is a difference between choosing not to engage and losing the ability to speak up for yourself. That night at my Aunt Gloria's table, I found that difference. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't make a list of everything Gerald had done over the years. I just asked him one question. And sometimes one question, asked calmly, from a person who already knows their own worth, is the most powerful thing in the room. You don't need their validation. You never needed it. You are always enough, right here, exactly as you are, living the life that actually fits you. And no one at any dinner table gets to take that from you.
Not now.
Not ever.